Sup Shredders, my name is Logan aka Spiderhands and welcome to an SP Patrons video today that I'm making for Paul7931 as part of their custom monthly music review. And if we switch over to here, we have ourselves a track on the screen on Spotify. This is from Zhao Jun and Hua Dong. This track is titled Drown Into Deep Down. We have lyrics as well for this, so we're going to listen through this track from start till finish and we're going to hear what we think. Let's go. With the Atypical Airship. Interesting counter rhythm there to the keys. Are we working with polyrhythms here? Let's go. Very somber immediately with that piano line. Fascinating counter rhythm going on here with the drums. It's very creepy with those builded woodwinds there. It's nice to have a little bit more energy with the percussion here. No? Oh, that was an interesting switch there with the dynamic range. I thought we were going to go huge then, but I suppose do have 4 minutes of the track to go. A lot of extra activity with the 16th note grooves on the percussion. Excellent exploration of the stereo field as well with the way those synths are going around left and right sides. I find it difficult to always be able to justify having tracks this long, because 6 minutes is quite a long time for a song, but if you're able to develop it, give little bits of extra pizzazz and sazz as we go along, not have the same OT, switch it up with the bass lines and progressions, and have a story that's compelling, you can get away with it. Coming down a little bit with the keys, it's nice to have that softness there. Not that it was ever particularly heavy, but in the grand scheme of things, if you go from polar opposites, but nice major resolution at the start of each progression. So we're ending on a bright note. Excuse the pun. At least harmonically or tonally. But there's a sense of unease that I get from the overall arrangement, the tones of the textures and timbres of the individual tracks and stuff, if you know what I mean. Especially with the oddity of the repeaters and those side percussions there going left to right. But nonetheless, I enjoyed my time with it, and I think it's a very interesting track. But we've got lyrics here kindly provided by Paul, so thank you for putting these through. I understand it was sung in English. I did hear that, but I just wanted to kind of get the story at the end just to kind of feel that out. Born like a song with the wild cries and joys. Been called a sweet boy, you picked up the toys. Broken down sometimes in those dark shoes and tired, draw a tattoo on your right. Would it bring to your respite? Inky lines. Alright, so basically, because this is the conclusion of my review of this track from an acts named should I say, Xiao Jun as well, featuring Hua Dong. This track titled Drown Into Deep Down. What I think this track is about, my conclusion is that the song, it's about someone who maybe people thought they were a tough guy, maybe they thought they'd been through a lot, they were strong, they were able to handle everything, but they just can't, they just patently can't. And so it's about coping with how people perceive you versus what your life actually is, kind of lying down and just trying to sort of suffer with the torment that you go through on a daily basis. You're strong on the outside but suffering on the inside. That lay down, drown and deep down, and just kind of repeating that process every night. Maybe when you go to sleep, maybe you can't sleep because you have to go back to that place, The scars that you've gone through, you've got all your scars from your life that you lived, either metaphorical or figurative. The train's been passed, you're off of it, and you're just kind of looking for a savior, wondering if that person is going to come save you no matter how strong you are, because the pain continues. That's my take on it. I think that it's a sad song. I think that the story is inherently depressing, and I think that there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with having a song that isn't you don't need music to be happy in order for it to be entertaining or meaningful. I think there's people that'll be able to relate to the story that's being told here, at least with my interpretation, although I could have gotten it wrong. I'm sure there's more nuance to it than what I described. I feel like I oversimplified it, but singing from the vocalists involved was very low key. It was very calm, and it had a bit of a kind of a creepy texture to it. Like we were kind of at the end of our rope, effectively struggling to get through the performance. Not that we were struggling to sing well, but that trying to take the place of the person inside the song. And I think that it was a really kind of surreal experience listening to that, because you have someone where like you can actually feel the pain and suffering they're going through within their vocal performance. There are some compelling vocal melodies both in the hook and the choruses. I like the lady backing vocalists that we had as well as we went along, but I nonetheless feel as though it was a difficult performance potentially for them to do by virtue of the heaviness of the subject matter and the way they had to describe it. And I think it was very authentic because of that. It was very similar the entire time with the approach, but I don't think that was a detriment. I think that that worked well for the consistency there, and there was enough change within the backing accompaniment with the structure of the track in order to justify it, even for a track at 6 minutes 08. Because if we look at the structure of the song, 6 minute 08 is a long time for a song, but I nonetheless feel as if we made the most of that real estate there. I've got little to no complaints about how it was spent. We had verses and we had choruses. We had a lot of instrumental breaks, a lot of focus on the parts with the keys, with an interesting intro that started with the keys and then had the drums at a sort of polyrhythm there. We had basses and guitar parts come in, as well as some synth pads and some string parts and other interesting sort of percussive textures. I think coupled with that, we had a really great attention to detail with the way that leads were placed, as well as post-production. But if I describe the way a few of the instruments sounded, like the 8th note to 16th notes that we had with the keys at the start was very somber sounding. It was very much kind of like the evening. You can kind of imagine a bit of darkness there. It wasn't too it wasn't too over the top, but it was dramatic enough that it invoked that imagery there. And I think that the lack of over complicating it via adding extensions or any kind of weird stuff like that, I think aside from the parallel minors that we had at the end part where we were almost finding hope with the idea of having a savior, we stayed within that kind of feel and groove the entire time. Maybe like this, the halfway point where things got a bit softer, he had some lighter, fluffier elements there. Maybe the tone shifted there, but the first half anyways was like setting the scene for that, again, that sadness there. The percussion kind of arguing with the piano at the beginning rhythmically there, establishing its own motif and movement forward, and having the guitar sink into it later on, as well as just having a nice bit of development throughout. We didn't just stick with the same groove, we articulated ourselves further and further as we went along in a way that was meaningful and kept the listener engaged by adding to the complexity of like the 16th note, like hi-hats and stuff like that, with some fascinating grooves and transitions between points. I think that the percussion was a highlight of this piece for me, which is why I think I pointed out to it a lot. But I don't want to take away from the guitar and drum parts, which were nicely tied together. The guitars in that mid-range picked up with arpeggios that sequenced nicely with the drum grooves, and the bass forming a nice sort of low end there to kind of sort of cement things and ground them in a way that isn't too overbearing and overwhelming. And I think if they'd been too low into that bass, it just would have been a little bit too severe sounding. So I'm glad we had equilibrium there, if that makes any sense. I mean, finally, the synth sounds that we had at the end of some of the verse stanzas were charming. They were very mysterious. Like we talked about, about a fairy tale within the track. It did sound like one, as if we were going on some sort of magical adventure, some sort of sadistic fantasy going on there. It's really creative, and I think there are some lovely, beautiful colors in that overall harmony throughout those bits there. And because things were so nicely notched in the post-production, it was very easy to understand and feel the presence of everything. But ultimately, I think coupled with the vocals and the story, with the way the song was structured as like a slow burn between two halves, one a little bit more sort of like low key and kind of gradually building to the point where maybe you have a revelation at the halfway point, and the other half more sort of focused on having a bit of breath before we kind of reiterate on the parallel majors at the starts of the forms. I think we had a track where we were learning more about ourselves, and the motif was one where we started mostly kind of in the minor sort of scale of things, and eventually kind of tried to perk up to a majorish kind of reality. I don't know if we quite got there, but that's my interpretation of the motif in general. I think there was nice bits of thematic development as well as musical growth there, and I liked it. I think that was well done. I like that we didn't go too dark with those things. But I mean, finally, the studio recording, mixing and mastering was great. I'm really happy with the way it actually sounded. The vocal performance was captured well. It kind of reminded me of some of like the Phil Collins stuff from the 80s, except a whole lot more grim, by virtue of the subject matter. Well, no, actually, no, I shouldn't say that because I haven't listened to enough of Phil Collins stuff to really get a idea. It was just like the tone of the vocals with like how kind of spaced out a lot of the synths and guitar parts were, the drums, the constant attention to detail in regards to the panning of the various instruments. It was very, very mysterious sounding. And I think when you combine the clarity of the vocals when they were there, because they weren't there all the time, and I kind of appreciate that as well, there was enough time for the backing to have its spot in the sun. But just, you know, like the gradual development of instruments, the dynamic range there with things not being the same loudness all the time. Again, the really calculated and clinical EQing and filtering of things that notched in the frequency spectrum with a really superb overall leveling, with lots of automation of parts in the stereo field, not just placed nice and wide, but also things could kind of go outside, like the synth leads that winch out to like the far left and rights, with the track still nice being loud. Nice and loud without pumping, so the bus compression and limiting being handled well. I think this is a track where you'd need like a few listens to really kind of soak it in, and I can't guarantee that this is a track that would always be appropriate for whatever mood, but I nonetheless appreciate the effort put into this, and I understand that there's definitely an audience who would appreciate and enjoy this, like Paul7931. So thank you very much for watching this review of this track from an ex, the acts named Zhao Jun and Hua Dong. This track titled Drown Into Deep Down, and hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, please do go show them some love via the various social medias and the Spotify page. And stay cool and stay safe, and please remember to support your local musicians and artists at this point in time, as they have more than ever thought of crazy stuff going on in the world. And I'll catch you in the next SC Patrons video. Spiderhands out.